Well, hello again. Here's another question for the yes or no treatment, and it's one that certainly in recent years has generated quite a bit of controversy. It is this: is nuclear power okay? And what we're really talking about here is whether it's okay to keep building nuclear power stations uh, as a kind of a counterweight to fossil fuel generation. So let's just go through a few facts here, and then look at what some of the main arguments are. Well, to begin with, the nuclear power and hydroelectric power each account for 12, 15, 16% each of electricity generating, and virtually all the rest is fossil fuel. So that's coal and natural gas. As yet, renewables are still quite a small percent of the total. But since electricity generating uses about 25% of the energy consumed, the rest mostly are from home heating and vehicular fueling. The total energy contribution by nuclear energy is more like 2.5–3%, which is about the same as the total of all renewable energy in the developed world, anyway. And that by renewables, what we're talking about is wind, wave, solar, and geothermal. So we are still in a position where there is a hugely dominant role in energy supply paid by fossil fuel sources. And so that's the issue, really, whether nuclear power can replace that or whether it should should replace that. There are, of course, also nuclear powered ships, both icebreakers and military vessels. And the other interesting point, I guess, is that there are a few countries that are very heavily committed to nuclear power. The most nuclear reactors are in the U.S., which gets quite a substantial amount of its power from nuclear. France, which gets 75% of its nuclear power, by the way, some of which gets exported to Britain. And then there's China and Japan, although Japan has cut off its nuclear generation in recent years because of the disaster at Fukushima. Here we are in a situation where it's all open to question and changing. So there's a great debate going on about whether or not it's a good idea. Okay, well, let's take a look at some of the arguments. Those who say yes, nuclear power, nuclear energy is a good idea, they would say, well, of course, number one, we don't really have much choice because renewables simply aren't going to close the gap anytime soon between the replacement and the lessening of dependence on fossil fuels. So we need nuclear energy just to keep keep things going. And of course, that argument really comes down to whether or not nuclear power is more desirable than fossil fuels. And of course, that's based principally on the global warming argument. The nuclear power plants, of course, don't produce any CO2, which the fossil fuel plants do. And also, they don't pollute the air. So, in many respects, nuclear power is a much more desirable option than fossil fuels. And in that sense, its time really is certainly in the medium future almost indispensable. Next, of course, the commissioning, construction, design of nuclear power plants a very complex and elaborate process. which will presumably continue, employs a lot of people. It stimulates a lot of industrial activity. So in that sense, it's good for the economy. And of course, the decommissioning of fossil fuel plants is the same thing. Now, one might say, how are we going to be able to afford all this? Particularly, as I'm speaking to you from the financial and economic disaster of the COVID situation. But nonetheless, if we're going to have power, we're going to have electricity to play our computer games with and buzz around in our electric scooters and all the rest of it, we're going to need to keep addressing this situation. So nuclear power in that respect provides both an answer and a clean answer. Next, nuclear power, once one has invested in one of these plants, does provide quite a measure of national energy security, to the extent that one is dependent upon importation of fuel for electricity generation. That could be worrying in times of tension. We have certainly been reminded of this in just the last few weeks here in Britain, as the President of France has threatened to shut off the electricity we buy from France if we don't change the fishing rules or something. I mean, so now this is kind of a little bit of bargaining nonsense and electioneering on his part and so forth. But it's the kind of thing that does make one worry and think a little bit about energy independence. The other big argument for nuclear power is that it's dependable. And the whole notion of the energy supply being reliable, that you know it'll be there when you need it, has become ever more critical in today's digital age, where all of our computers and processing facilities and so forth are in an always-on mode with the internet. And if the internet goes down, if the power supply is interrupted, that can be a very disruptive event. So energy security is a big feature and a big argument in favor of nuclear energy, because it just keeps pumping out the power. Okay, well, those are the arguments supporting the continued devotion to nuclear energy, nuclear power, and they basically come down to the fact that we really can't do without it, at least for the medium term, and also that it's quite desirable from an environmental standpoint. So those are the arguments. Now let's look at the negatives, those who say no, nuclear power, nuclear energy is not okay. Well, I suppose the biggest argument is one of safety and the risk of accidents. The horrendous event at Chernobyl, the catastrophe really in Japan after the tsunami at Fukushima, and to a lesser extent the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania in America, all tell us that a nuclear accident is possible. And it's the kind of thing you really don't want to happen, because you don't know what the impact of it could be. They say that the aftermath of the Chernobyl incident was the destruction of a lot of livestock for thousands of miles around because of radiation poisoning and so forth. So the accident scenario is bad news indeed, when you want to avoid at all costs, and therefore a continued devotion to nuclear power is just making that all the worse. Next, despite being obviously well guarded, these nuclear plants are still vulnerable to crazy people, to terrorists, to some form of sabotage. There's certainly plenty of people out there in the world who want to bring the whole world down, or at least individual nations, and are willing to go to any kind of length. So nuclear facilities everywhere have to be on guard against that, and presumably the security arrangements in some places are a lot more effective than others. Thus far, in the history of nuclear power, we don't seem to have had any real problems of this sort, but we don't know, do we? I mean, we wouldn't be told. I imagine these places get attacked from time to time. The people involved are eliminated, but nonetheless, it's something you have to kind of worry about. Next, and I suppose this is one of the really strongest arguments against nuclear power, is the linkage between generating electricity from nuclear sources and the manufacture of nuclear weapons. The whole process of enriching uranium for the use in a power reactor makes it available for use in nuclear weapons. That has certainly been the issue with Iran's uranium enrichment, and the fact that most Western countries don't trust them to confine themselves to just making peaceful electricity with their enriched uranium. And also the byproduct of a lot of nuclear reactors, plutonium, is a source of energy and fuel for nuclear weapons. So there's quite a linkage there, really a worrying one. So we'd all be better off if if nobody had nuclear power, because therefore the ability to produce nuclear weapons would be diminished just as well. Next, there is major disruption just from the mining and transport of uranium, whether it's within a country or through the oceans or whatever. And so it's something we could just as well do without. It certainly applies, of course, to fossil fuels as well. But it's an unpleasant aspect to it, really. Next, a great deal of the uranium used in nuclear power stations is mined in what might be charitably called dodgy countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Nigeria, Namibia, and so forth. And so, therefore, one can't really totally count on the reliability of supply from places like that, just because of kind of political volatility and uncertainty. And finally, we still haven't really figured out a reliable, safe, and kind of environmentally accepted way to store the used uranium, the depleted uranium. It's to varying degrees sitting in big holes in the ground. Who knows what's the result of that is, whether it's seeping into groundwater, et cetera, et cetera. And nobody's happy about this. No one has really come up with a solution of what to do with this stuff that everybody agrees with is economical and safe. So that's messy. Okay, well, there's some pretty strong arguments against, and I suppose the two strongest really are the risk of accident and the whole linkage with nuclear weapons, neither one of which is a very happy state of affairs. Well, that leads to my take. What do I think about this? Well, I'm not too happy about this. I mean, of course, the realities are that we really don't have much choice to have nuclear power, but perhaps as a bridge to the long term. The long-term goal, which I think we're all working toward, and which of course is happening with the notion of electric vehicles and so forth, is to get to a point where we are largely, or even eventually totally, dependent upon renewable forms of energy supply. Now, God knows how long that's going to be, because our energy is so overwhelmingly fossil fuel based right now. But everything that's going on right now says to me that that's the direction we're headed in. We'll eventually get there. So we need nuclear energy as a bridge device to provide the electricity that we need, simply because we're not willing to accept fossil fuels as the only alternative. And of course, what that really means is that we got to make jolly well sure that we're really good at keeping these nuclear power sources secure, And as to what we do about the linkage between nuclear power sources and nuclear weapons, I give up. That's up to the diplomats and the military of the world to figure out. That will doubtlessly result in conflict over the years, and let's just hope it isn't anything more than just a minor disagreement. Well, that's what I've got to say about that. I guess a tense kind of subject, and one that you come out of not feeling really very happy, but that's the nature of the beast. So, sorry, that's what I think. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. As usual, give me a like if you did, subscribe, comment, even hit the notification bell, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.